actually talks in great deal about the bifurcated process and the rights that a defendant is entitled to as it relates to that NGI presentation.
Okay. Well, I received the report this morning, so I haven't even had a chance to review it. So at the risk of hearing all the same arguments again, which I don't want to do, Mr. Freilich, any response to any of that at this particular point?
Yes. I had been in contact with Dr. O'Donnell. He had to review information, and he gave me an opinion for trial. That's what the court wanted me to do. I received that. I suppose we could take this up. I'd ask that we take it up at a later date. We're here to do phase 1. This would apply to phase 2 if it even gets to that point. But I haven't had much of an opportunity to review all of the documentation that was provided. But I know that Dr. O'Donnell apparently has testified in the state of Illinois with regards to the NGI plea and toxicity and opinions on the toxicology of methamphetamine. So all of that, I think we could take up at a later point. I know today we're here for the fact-finding part of this case. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we will take it up at a different time. Okay. Then as soon as the jury arrives, we'll get underway. I will instruct them with 601, as I had indicated to the parties I was going to do, and then we'll get underway with opening statements. As I indicated on Friday, opening statements will be limited to 30 minutes each. You'll get a warning at about when you have about 5 minutes left. And anything else from the state? From the defense, Mr. Freilich?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, then we are in recess until the jury is assembled. jury is assembled. Anything to bring up, Mr. Lizzak or Mr. Saunders?
No.
Mr. Freilich?
No.
The jury's ready? Bring him in. Why don't you stay standing till everybody gets in? I could see you talking about it, so no problem. All right, be seated. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good weekend. The first thing we're going to do here this morning is administer the juror's oath. So I'm going to ask all of you to stand up and raise your right hand.
You and each of you do solemnly swear that you will well and truly try the issue between the plaintiff and the defendant and a true verdict give according to law and the evidence in court, so help you God.
Have a seat. The next thing I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is briefly explain to you about the process. We have, obviously, 16 jurors. There's only going to be 12 that are going to be in deliberations. For those of you who aren't familiar with that process, we have a number of alternates. The purpose of an alternate is to ensure that if someone takes ill or can't return or for any reason finds that they can no longer participate in the process, we will continue to have 12, because if we drop below 12, the trial has to end and we need to start over. That's why we have 4 extra. At the end of the first phase of this trial, the computer will randomly select 4 of you who are going to be excused and won't participate in the deliberations. That's the purpose of the alternate, and that's the purpose of having 16 instead of 12 right off the bat. I gave you a number of instructions on Friday, and I want to give you one more instruction here this morning to help you better understand the process. In this case, Taylor Schabusiness has entered 2 pleas to the charges in this case: not guilty and not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The law requires that the issues raised by the 2 pleas be decided in a continuous trial that is separated into 2 phases. Your verdict will be taken at the end of each phase. You are to consider only the issues presented to you during each phase. You are not to consider any issues other than those presented to you for each verdict. In the first phase of the trial, you will be asked to determine whether the defendant is guilty of the charges of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. You will make this determination solely upon the facts which deal with the actual incident alleged in the information. During this first phase, you will not be asked to determine whether, at the time of the incident, the defendant was suffering from mental disease or defect. If, after the first phase of the trial, you find the defendant not guilty, the trial will be over. If you find the defendant guilty, the trial will move to a second phase. During the second phase, you will be asked to determine whether the defendant is responsible for criminal conduct. Wisconsin law provides that a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if, at the time it was committed, the person had a mental disease or defect and as a result lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct or to conform the conduct to the requirements of the law. If the trial proceeds into this second phase, you will be instructed more fully as to your duties at that time. We'll now begin the first phase of the trial, and I again caution you that this first phase is concerned solely with the question of whether the defendant committed the crimes of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault as set forth in the information. The lawyers will now make opening statements. The purpose of an opening statement is to give the lawyers an opportunity to tell you what they expect the evidence will show so that you will better understand the evidence as it is introduced during the trial. I must caution you, however, that the opening statements are not evidence. Having said that, Mr. Saunders, are you prepared to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning. The evidence in this case will show that in the early morning of February 22nd of 2022, the defendant strangled her friend Shad Thyrion to death using a dog collar. That after he was dead, engaged in sexual acts with him, with his body, subsequently dismembered him using kitchen knives found in the home. Over the next few days, in the first phase of trial, the state of Wisconsin, myself, District Attorney Lassay, will present a number of witnesses who will testify about what happened in this case, and that'll show and demonstrate to you that the defendant committed these acts. You'll hear testimony and evidence will show that in the early morning of February 23rd, is a Tuesday, kind of a normal cold February in Wisconsin, at a house on Stony Brook Lane. It's sort of, if you know the area, the west side of Green Bay, Fireman's Park, West Mason Street, that area. Tara Packnage is kind of in her home and is awoken by a storm door shutting. There's a door that's sort of abuts the driveway to the residence, normal single-family home in the area. Hears a storm door close and is awoken from sleep. It's early morning, 2:30, 3 a.m., somewhere in there. She goes and gets up. It kind of wakes her up, and she's aware at that point that her son, Shad, was in the basement with a friend, Taylor. They had been over the day before, February 22nd, February 21st, in that time frame. And she kind of goes and sees what's going on, right? We hear this noise late in the night, early in the morning, and she sees the basement light is on. At that point, she's aware that, they were down there throughout the day of the 22nd, and she goes down and sees, because the light's on in the basement, and she's seeing what's going on. And you'll see sort of the scene. Sort of go down the stairs to a normal basement. It's partially finished on one half, partially like a utility area, laundry, that kind of storage area. And right next to the stairs, there's a 5-gallon bucket that you'd get at a home center. And she lifts a towel that's covering the bucket. It's like a beach towel. And unfortunately, sees essentially a mother's worst nightmare. That her son's head is in the bucket. Understandably, you'll hear testimony about that and the shock that caused. Tara goes and talks to her boyfriend who lives in the home, Steve. You'll hear from him. He goes and checks too, and ultimately they call 911. And that's how this case comes to be. You'll hear from the officers this morning, likely, who arrived on scene and what they observed, obviously confirming the information that was reported to law enforcement about Shad's circumstances, how they find the bucket, and it has parts of Shad as well as knives. You'll hear about, at that point, a relative lack of other indicia of a crime occurred. It's not a significant amount of blood on the walls and on the floor. There's some, you'll hear about that, but it takes law enforcement time to see what actually happened, the full extent of what the defendant did in this case. By that point, they're actually interviewing the defendant, and she's providing them information that, no, Shad's still in the basement. The rest of him is still in the basement. And ultimately, you'll hear about what officers find in that basement. There's, as I mentioned, the living area has some mattresses, blood-soaked. Once you remove the blankets, other clothing items. There's a tote, a teal tote, kind of a larger Tupperware. that has knives as well as body parts of Shad. There's bags, a sort of duffel bag type item, a backpack, all of which contain parts of Shad's body, as well as knives that were used in the dismemberment. And you'll hear all about that. The officers who responded on scene and processed the evidence, ultimately locating the parts of Shad. You'll hear about then other things that are found. Signs of methamphetamine use, which the defendant later acknowledges happened with her and Shad right before this crime occurred. Cleaning products. As I mentioned, you may have an idea in your head of this crime and what that looks like and what law enforcement would encounter when they got there, and you'll see what actually encountered. You'll hear about Clorox wipes and how the defendant would go to the shower and sort of clean up and use a squeegee and clean up the scene. You'll hear about the medical examiner and their team who arrive and are dealing with this situation, and it's determined that not all of Shad is located in the basement. There's certain parts that are missing, and ultimately in the van that the defendant is driving, gold minivan, there's additional legs of Shad found in that van. You'll hear from Dr. Vincent Tranquita. He's our medical examiner at the time, and he will testify about cause and manner of death. And you'll hear about the cause being strangulation. Significant force applied to the neck, significant signs of strangulation that you'll hear about, and then ultimately, obviously, a significant amount of dismemberment after the fact. You'll hear Dr. Tranquita talk about that. That's all happening at Stony Brook. 23rd, throughout that day, you'll hear about significant investigation that goes on at that house. And then you'll hear about then, a few hours after that initial 911 call, how law enforcement kind of gets word that, Shad was with the defendant, Ms. Schabusiness, before this offense, and that they locate her at her apartment on Eastman Avenue, sort of on the other side of Green Bay, east side. Encountered as she's leaving the apartment that she shares with another person, and you'll see that encounter, how the defendant is essentially literally caught red-handed, blood on her hands. There's a significant knife wound that she talks about later was suffered in the course of the crimes. There's blood on her clothing. There's black sweatshirt, black sweatpants, and she talks with law enforcement for a pretty significant amount of time. Detective David Groff, who's seated at counsel table here, interviews the defendant along with another detective, and they start to learn more about what happened in this case and sort of the hours leading up to the crimes. Again, it's a significant and lengthy interview, and the defendant's providing information that you'll see jives with what law enforcement's encountering in that basement. She admits to, as I mentioned, methamphetamine use before this. She and Shad were sort of hanging out beforehand. They were friends from school back in the day, and it seems like they were in a friendly state at the time of this offense. And you'll hear then they go to the Stony Brook Lane home and go to the basement. They're let in by Steve. You'll hear about that in the early morning of the 22nd. You'll hear the defendant describe that what apparently begins as a somewhat sexual encounter escalates to a dog collar being placed around Shad's neck. And the defendant quite vividly describes what she then did. She's yanking on the chain. She's describing what's happening to Shad. It's evidence that you'll hear, and you'll hear it from the defendant's own mouth, that shows that this is an intentional act. It's not one pull of a gun trigger. It's an intense act. You'll hear about that from Vincent Tranquita, Dr. Tranquita as well. She's pulling harder, just hoping that he eventually passes, and it takes a significant amount of time. It takes several minutes, as you'll hear her say. After that, after Shad's deceased, she describes what she then does with his body, again, engaging in sexual acts, ultimately dismembering him quite significantly. She reports that afterwards, that law enforcement would have fun finding all the body parts that are located throughout the basement, told law enforcement where to find certain body parts. Like I said, it wasn't obvious to law enforcement who initially respond to that basement what happened. It's information being provided by the defendant that later is corroborated by law enforcement. You'll hear the defendant admit to cleaning up, avoiding guilt, avoiding responsibility for this. You'll hear her talk about that. You'll see the signs of that, as I mentioned earlier. That dismemberment process takes that entire day of the 22nd, essentially. As I mentioned, Tara wakes up to Taylor leaving at about 2:33 a.m. on the 23rd. The investigation doesn't stop there, despite the defendant's confessions. Law enforcement continues. They send DNA to the lab, and it confirms the accounts that we're getting here. Blood on the defendant's hands, left and right hands, or Shad's. Blood on the knives, some of the knives that are used is Shad's. The clothing item, as I mentioned, the black sweatshirt, black sweatpants, has red substances, blood on the sweatpants, all consistent with what happened, with the defendant's statements, with what law enforcement's seeing. So this case is really not a whodunit. You'll hear about the crimes that clearly occurred. You'll hear the defendant's statement saying, yep, I did it. And you have DNA evidence and other investigative tools that kind of corroborate everything else. So for this, the defendant's charged with the 3 crimes that the judge read off earlier. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, or dismembering the corpse, and then third-degree sexual assault. So we'll get into what that all means later. We'll have closing arguments where we kind of provide summation and provide all that to you. But for now, as you kind of listen to the evidence, count 1, the state needs to prove that the defendant caused the death of Shad and that she did so intentionally. As I mentioned, you're going to hear a lot about that. And it's nothing but intentional. This is not an accident. This is not a mistake. It's a significant act the defendant did. Dismembering a corpse for the purpose of concealing a crime, you'll hear a lot about that. And third-degree sexual assault, how she engaged in oral contact with Shad's body and inserted objects in his body as well after the fact. I know in voir dire some of you talked about, you've heard some about this case, and that's to be expected potentially. It's really important to stress that our system of justice is not based on media accounts, on word of mouth, on what you hear. The evidence is what happens in these 4 walls, and what you hear and see. And ultimately, the evidence in this case will point to one area. The defendant is guilty of these 3 crimes. So again, this is just meant to be an overview on the evidence we expect you to hear over the next few days in the first phase. But ultimately, the case comes down to choices and responsibility. The defendant made a series of choices February 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. Choices to use methamphetamine. Choices to kill her friend, Shad. Choices to then utterly degrade him after the fact. The choices the defendant made. And when we come back in closing arguments later this week at some point, we'll argue to you that the evidence in this case is clear. The choices the defendant made indicate that you're not going to have a reasonable doubt about what the defendant did, that she's guilty of all 3 crimes. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Freeland, are you prepared to make an opening statement?
Yes, I am, Your Honor. Thank you very much. Your Honor, may it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Lassay, Mr. Saunders. Thank you for your service as jurors. We definitely appreciate you being here, serving on the jury, because a jury is an integral part of the court process. Without you jurors, our court system simply couldn't function. The lawyers couldn't do their job, and the court couldn't do its job. So we appreciate your time your attention to detail, and your anticipated focus over the next several days that you're going to put into this very serious case. Now, in this case, the state of Wisconsin, through the Brown County District Attorney's Office, has the complete burden of proof. The state must prove to all of you jurors, beyond a reasonable doubt, each and every element of the crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The United States Constitution presumes that every person who is accused of a crime is presumed to be innocent. And in this case, Taylor Schabusiness is presumed to be innocent. She doesn't have to prove anything. The defense does not have to prove anything in this case. Why? Because the complete burden of proof rests with the District Attorney's Office, with the state of Wisconsin. They have to prove up all the facts. And in this case, you're going to hear a lot of different facts. You're going to hear a lot of different accounts from witnesses, citizen witnesses, detectives, police officers, experts, DNA analysts, medical examiners, all of that. You're going to have to take all of that information into consideration when you deliberate. But the entire burden rests with the state in this case. My client, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, also has an absolute right to remain silent. Under the law, she has a right not to testify if she so chooses, and if she elects not to testify, you cannot use that fact alone against her in this trial. She doesn't have to testify, but she may testify. In this particular case, ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Denise Schabusiness was friends with Shad. They went to high school together. They went to school at Bayport, and they had classes together. And they were, when they were younger, they dated for a short period of time. But basically, they were friends. You're going to hear some testimony on, it was a Wednesday, February 23rd of 2022. You're going to hear, I believe, a 911 tape. You're going to hear testimony from Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks. They live at 829 Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay. There was a call from Mr. Hendricks that he apparently went downstairs in the basement and saw a bucket, saw a human head in the bucket, and he had checked it out because his significant other, Tara Pakinich, had initially went down there and saw this and had him go check. He didn't have glasses on, but he apparently called 911, and that caused the officers to come to the scene at 829 Stony Brook Lane. And there'll be some testimony about this residence. It's a small, quaint home. It's got a loft upstairs where I believe Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks were sleeping. That has a floor level with kitchen, living area, and then it has a basement. And there will be testimony. We believe that Stephen Hendricks last saw Shad at the house on Monday night, which I believe would have been February 21st of 2022. He will indicate that, both of them will indicate that they really did not see Taylor Schabusiness leave. They heard a vehicle start, a door slam, caused them to wake up. Officer Wanish, you'll hear from him. He came to the house and went down the basement to make some observations. That the officers did a protective sweep. They walked around the basement and the entire house to see if there were any other people there on February 23rd, 2022. And the only people that were there were Tara Pakinich, the owner, Stephen Hendricks, and daughter Ava Wheelock. Those people were there. No Taylor Schabusiness was there. She wasn't in the basement. She wasn't anywhere in the house. But obviously there was some investigation, and evidence was apparently found. And it's true that law enforcement officers didn't have a clear picture or clear understanding of what was really happening or what happened, and so they're trying to figure things out as they went along. There would be some testimony from other officers with regards to the other scene, which is 2353 Eastman Avenue in Green Bay. That, I submit, was Taylor Schabusiness's apartment, and she lived there with Scott Thoms, Thoms. and law enforcement officers came over there, and my client came out of the apartment complex, and she was arrested. She had a warrant. She was taken into a squad car and taken down to the Green Bay Police Department for questioning by Detective Groff and Detective Kevin Kempf. Also, law enforcement arrested the other person in apartment 1, that was Taylor's apartment, Scott Tomes, and he was ordered to lay on the ground, and he was taken into custody as well. You'll hear from lots of different officers, in this case law enforcement officers. The officers found a gold Chrysler Town and Country minivan, I believe 2006, and they found it parked in the Eastman Avenue parking lot, and there were some concerns about it. Now this vehicle is owned by Scott Tomes, and I believe that will come out that he was the one that owned that vehicle. But inside that vehicle there was a crock pot box, and there were some human body parts in there. In this particular case, you'll also hear from Dr. Tranchita. He's the medical examiner, did a lot of investigative work, looking at cause and manner of death of the deceased. So you'll hear about all of his findings. You're also going to hear from Kevin Scott. He's the DNA analyst for the State of Wisconsin Crime Lab, and his testimony, I believe, will show that he took various swabs as part of the DNA analysis, and items were swabbed. There were sweatpants, there were blades, there were light switch, there was boxes, hands, people's mouths, and a dildo, because that was found. The swab of the dildo, he will testify, I believe, that the possible contribution of DNA from Shad Thyrion as it relates to the dildo is inconclusive due to the complexity of the mixture. So the state is going to argue that there was a sexual assault by use of the dildo, and the deceased DNA is not on it. So that's something you'll have to take into consideration. You're going to hear from Sergeant Kurt Brester from the Green Bay Police Department. He was dispatched to 829 Stony Brook Lane regarding a suspicious situation on February 23rd, 2022, and that he conferred with Officer Wanish outside, that he had contact with Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks, and that he did a protective sweep of the residence, and they didn't find anybody else other than Ava Wheelock, who was the young lady, she's 16, sleeping in a bedroom. You're going to hear from, I believe, Officer T.J. Buckman, that he arrived on the scene as a supervisor to this apartment complex, and he actually went to 2353 Eastman Avenue in Green Bay, and he saw that gold van parked outside, and he had several other officers keep the van under surveillance, and at least from his initial investigation, he did not have enough information to determine whether or not Taylor Schabusiness was the suspect or the victim. And so those are some other things that you're going to have to take a look at and think about. You're going to see the videotape in this case where there was a lengthy video down at the Green Bay Police Department between Detective Groff and Detective Kempf and my client, Taylor Denise Schabusiness. And they talked, and Detective Groff asked her lots of questions about what she knew and her whereabouts and what may or may not have happened. So you have to pay close attention to that and think about the things that are said. In a case like this, and really in any case, you have to assess the credibility of each and every witness. You have to take all of that into consideration in this matter. I'd ask that you, when you're considering all of the evidence, don't jump to conclusions. Don't rush to judgment. Please keep an open mind. Listen to all the facts. Listen to what every witness has to say carefully and weigh what they have to say. And remember, there's always two sides to every story. You jurors are going to have to decipher the facts of what may have occurred or what didn't occur. But at the end of the case, we ask that you find our client not guilty on all the counts. Thank you.
Saunders, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we have just a very brief sidebar before the first witness?
Sure.
Your Honor, the state calls Amy Shannon.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God? Please have a seat and state your name for the record.
Amy Shannon.
Before we go on, I wouldn't be a jury trial if we didn't have technical problems. So there's going to be an audio played shortly, and we're having a hard time getting the audio on. So we're just take a minute to see if we can, if we can't get it done quickly, I'm going to excuse the jury and call somebody out who can do it.
My name's Miss Cole.
It's booting up, so I keep listening. It's loading again, so it's rebooting. I'm not sure exactly how long that's going to take, but.
Does the court wish that I make the sort of foundational questions? They're relatively brief.
Sure, why don't we do that? That will give us some more time. So go ahead, Mr. Lezay.
Thank you. Ms. Shannon, can you state for the record how you are employed?
I'm the Assistant Director for Brown County Public Safety Communications, such as the 911 Dispatch Center.
Can you just explain for the jury how the 911 dispatch center works in Brown County and how it relates to the other law enforcement agencies?
So the 911 Center takes the calls for all law enforcement, ambulance services, and fire departments within Brown County. As part of that, all calls and radio traffic that come in through our center are recorded, and then they are held in our center as evidence for so date 120 days. As were requested by agencies, we release that evidence back to them because it's technically their evidence. We're just the holders of that evidence.
And if a law enforcement agency makes a request that you retain a particular call or record, is that something that your agency does?
We do.
And are those calls, are they something that are easily discernible by the date and the location of the call?
Yes.
Does the system actually store the location of a phone call that comes in?
It depends on how it comes in, but yes.
And essentially, are you able to serve as a record keeper or records custodian for the 911 center given your current role?
That is part of my role, is to be the records custodian.
And how long have you worked with the 911 center overall?
Overall, over 10 years.
And were you asked by the Green Bay Police Department to record and maintain a call from February 22nd, actually February 23rd, 2022, I believe, at 3:24 a.m.?
Yes.
And as part of your work with the 911 center, did you have an opportunity to review a recorded phone call that came in on February 23rd at 3:24 a.m. from a residence located at 829 Stony Brook Lane?
Yes,
You had a chance to listen to that entire call?
I did.
And if we played that phone call for you, would you be able to identify that call?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point, I would like to have that call used as an exhibit.
Any objection?
Well, I didn't hear what he said.
He wants to offer the recording as an exhibit, and then he wants to play it.
I have no objection.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are about to hear an audio recording. Recordings are proper evidence, and you may consider them just as any other evidence. Please listen carefully. Some parts might be hard to understand.
County Public Safety, how may I help you?
Yes, I'd like an officer at 829 Stony Brook. Girlfriend just woke me up and swears that she found her severed head of her son in the basement.
Okay, can you repeat the address, sir?
829 Stony Brook.
Okay, S-T-O-N-E-Y?
Is it EY, right? Yes. No E. Just L-Y.
Is that a house, apartment, or duplex?
It's a house.
What's your phone number?
My number is 327-3748. My name's Steve.
327-3748?
Yes.
What's your last name, Steve?
Hendricks.
Okay, tell me what's happening there again?
I have no clue what's happening. My girl swears that she's found her severed head of her son in the basement.
Did you go down there?
In a bucket. I went down. I can't tell what the fuck it is. Part of my language. I'm kind of a little freaked out.
Okay, did she just wake up and say that?
Yeah.
And whose head is it?
She's claiming it's her son.
How old is her son?
24, 25?
Has he been missing, or?
No, yeah, he was here yesterday with some chick, and then now all of a sudden nobody's here. And she came up to use the restroom a couple times, and she keeps calling and calling, and now she's saying that she hears the phone down there too.
Okay, is she with you right now?
Yes, she's upstairs. She's a little freaked out, and I don't know what to do.
Okay, all right, stay on the line. And you said you went down there, correct?
Yeah, and I lifted the toe, but I can't see very well, and I can't tell what the hell it is.
So there's something in the bucket.
There's something in the goddamn bucket there.
Okay.
If she won't look again, I don't know what the hell, man.
Do you think she's hallucinating, or do you think that?
I don't think so. Takanich.
N-I-C-H. What's her first name?
Tara, T-A-R-A.
What's her middle initial, date of birth?
What's your middle initial? L?
Hello?
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yep.
Okay. What's her date of birth?
What's your date of birth? 5/14/74.
All right, can I talk to her?
Yes, you can.
Hello?
Hi, Tara. So can you tell me what's going on?
Are you positive my son's head is in a bucket, a round bucket in my basement?
What makes you think that?
Because I looked in the bucket,
What did you see?
exactly what I told you.
Okay, where's the rest of the body at?
No idea.
Okay. When's the last time you saw your son?
Well, I guess today is Wednesday, so I picked him up from his dad's on Monday. And because he doesn't normally stay here, he was going to stay here for a few days. He got left the laundry. He was here a couple hours, then he left with Taylor. And they had some big Taylor,
Who's that?
girl, Taylor Coronado.
You know how to spell her last name?
Coronado. No, not exactly.
Okay.
But it's the common spelling from around here.
All right. That is
He
cool.
went to middle school and high school with her. I don't know if he does it with me.
When's the last time you saw him?
Well, he left with her. They both came back. I believe they both came back while we were sleeping Monday night. And I assume they slept all day yesterday, so I haven't seen him since Monday night physically. I thought they were sleeping all day. I was gone for a little while yesterday, Tuesday, and he's 25 and I'm on the basement.
All right.
What are you doing? You know what I mean?
All right. Well, we've got help.
And then I heard my door and her minivan start. And I went downstairs and I went to the bathroom. The lights were out in the basement. I turned them off and I looked around and no one was there. So then when I turned around to come back upstairs, there was a 5-gallon bucket with a towel over it. And I'm like, oh great, that's why they're out here all day yesterday. They were pissing in a bucket. And I looked and that is not what was in that bucket.
What is your son's name?
Shad Thyrion,
C-H-A-D?
S-H-A-D,
How do you spell his last name?
T-H-Y-R-I-O-N,
What's his date of birth?
9797.
Is there blood down there?
No.
Okay. All right, ma'am. I have officers that are headed over to your house right now, okay?
Head over.
Okay, I'll go down there.
I guess just stay away from it. Just stay away from
From that area, but we're on the second level, so we're going to go down to the kitchen and not to the basement.
Okay,
We
yeah.
can answer the door and stuff.
Okay, all right, ma'am.
My 16-year-old daughter is sleeping.
Excuse me?
My 16-year-old daughter is here sleeping.
Okay.
They do not make a lot of noise. I don't know.
Okay, just let them know that. I'm sure they won't try, okay?
My heart is jumping out of my head. It's beating so.
And, I mean, you're sure it couldn't be like a fake head or something?
I'm not touching it. I'm not looking at it again.
Okay. All right, ma'am. Just go ahead and wait for the officers, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Ms. Shannon, the audio recording that was just played, is that consistent with the recording that was retained by the 911 center for the call from the address on Stony Brook Drive on February 23rd of 2022.
Yes.
Your Honor, for the record, I believe that we played the entirety of the audio recording, which is 7 minutes and 13 seconds. I would ask that the recording be admitted as an exhibit.
Any objection, Mr. Fraley?
No.
All right, that exhibit will be received.
I have no further questions from Ms. Shannon.
All right, Mr. Fraley, cross-examination?
Sure. Ms. Shannon, morning.
Good morning.
How is a recording like that kept by the 911 dispatch center?
All calls and radio traffic coming into our center are recorded automatically. We have a recording system, and regardless of how it's coming in, phone or radio, it's recorded, and it stays in that recording. We have it set for 180 days.
Okay. Do you, at least for the recording that we just heard, was that then downloaded to a disc or something?
Yes, and then we also keep it on a separate drive to make sure that it doesn't go away, because those do automatically clear after 180 days. So we downloaded it to a disk as evidence, and then we also keep a recording of it in-house.
So is it your testimony that you preserved that tape from February 23rd of 2022?
Yes.
And then it was, what, was it sent to the Green Bay Police Department, the District Attorney's Office? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
It was sent to the District Attorney's Office,
Okay. And then they kept it in their custody?
as far as I know.
Okay. But 911 Dispatch Center still has a copy as well?
Yes.
Was there any way that that recording was altered in any way?
No.
Do only certain people have access to it?
Yes.
Who was that?
Myself, and then we have a group of supervisors. They are the people who make the recordings. We have one person who is assigned to do it, but if he's not there, then any of the supervisors can. But they're the only ones that have access to that drive.
That 911 tape that we just heard, it wasn't excised or modified in any way, shape, or form, was it?
No.
And it was downloaded off the mainframe computer at the dispatch
The
center?
server, yes.
Okay, off the server?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, one more. This was kept in the regular course of business of the 911 dispatch center?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You're excused. State's next witness.
The state calls Officer Alex Wanish.
Officer, if you just want to step right up over here, and before you have a seat, turn and face her and raise your right hand. She'll place you under oath.
You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God.
Yes, sir.
Please have a seat and state your name for the record.
Officer Alex Wanish, W-A-N-I-S-H.
Okay, and then if you could just make sure you stay close to the microphone so we can all hear you. And with that, Mr. Saunders, the witness is yours.
Thank you. Officer, how are you employed?
With the City of Green Bay Police Department as a patrol officer.
And how long have you been employed as a patrol officer with Green Bay PD?
Since April of 2019.
And is that the totality of your law enforcement experience?
I worked about a year and a half prior to that with City of Manitowoc.
Okay. So about 2017 is when your law enforcement career started?
Correct.
And can you outline for us what training you received to be a police officer?
I went through the 720 Academy at NWTC. Before that, I went to UW-Platteville for my 4-year bachelor degree in criminal justice.
Okay. And what are some of your regular duties as a police officer?
Taking any dispatch call that comes out, traffic, that kind of stuff.
Sort of respond to the initial incidents?
Correct.
And then do you kind of conduct follow-through investigation as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Officer, I want to ask you about February 23rd of 2022. Do you recall if you were working in that capacity on that day?
Yes, I was.
Directing your attention to about 3:25 a.m., were you dispatched to a call around that time?
Yes.
To where were you dispatched?
The address was 829 Stony Brook, City of Green Bay, Brown County.
And is that an area of Green Bay that you're familiar with in your regular patrol duties?
Yes, it is.
And I guess what area of Green Bay is that?
It's the west side. I guess the closest major intersection would be Mason and Military.
And what was the reason you were dispatched to that residence?
The initial call came out that the complainant's girlfriend found her son's severed head in a bucket in the basement.
And did you arrive at the Stony Brook Lane residence?
Yes, I did.
Were any other officers with you in that initial time period?
Officer Plonky arrived at the same time as I did.
And what happened when you got to the residence?
We made contact with the complainant and then his girlfriend, and we started talking to them, and then we were directed to the basement where the bucket was located. Officer Plonky remained upstairs just to keep an eye on the rest of the house. I went downstairs. At the bottom of the stairs to the right, there was a green bucket with a shower towel on top of it, just to verify we had an actual head in the bucket. Lifted the towel off, and there was, in fact, a human severed head in the bucket.
So I want to back up just a little bit. When you got to the residence, you said you met with the complainant. Was that Stephen Hendricks?
Correct.
Okay. And then you said his girlfriend was also present?
Yes.
And who is that person?
First name is Tara.
Tara, okay. And Officer Plonky stayed with those individuals?
Correct.
Right? Okay. And then you went down to the basement?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And you mentioned observing the bucket. I guess where in the basement was that located?
As you go down the stairs, if you turn to the immediate right, it was at the bottom of the stairs to the right.
Was it in pretty close proximity to the stairs?
Yes.
After you made that observation, what did you do?
After I pulled the towel off,
Yes.
I had Officer Plonky come downstairs and just verify we had, in fact, found a human head in the bucket. And then we started to notify a supervisor and then ask for additional units.
And at that time, on February 23rd, 2022, did your department utilize body-worn cameras?
Yes.
Is that something that was operating on that day?
Yes.
And did you have the chance to review your body-worn camera prior to your testimony today?
Yes, I did.
If you were able to observe that here in court, would you be able to recognize it?
Yes, I'll be able to.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd propose to play Exhibit 2. It's approximately 6 minutes.
Any objection?
No objection.
I'm playing Exhibit 2 beginning at 0 seconds.
don't see this?
I opened the towel, I picked up the towel and dropped it because I don't know what the fuck it is, man. I have bad vision, and she's like, is that what I think it is? I'm like, I don't fucking know what the fuck it is.
Do you want to just stay with those two? I'll just go see it.
Yeah.
Where's it at?
So right there, look right, there's a bucket with a towel on it.
Just keep that. Dude, it is. Come here.
Hold on one second.
Let's just. Okay. Hold on, just. That's real, right? That's real low. Alcohol, I got 4 Ed 1 to 82 Sam. I know you're busy over there, but this is actually what it's going to be. It's not going to be a 961 thing or a 96 thing, so we're going to need more units here. That's real dumb. Supposed to be there. Was that Fred 1? No for right now. If we could get more units here sooner rather than later, that'd be appreciated. We've got quite a bit of blood down here, and I want to clear this rest of this house. We've got 2 people in the house for sure.
For the record, the entirety of Exhibit 2, approximately 5 minutes 59 seconds, was played. Officer, having reviewed the exhibit, do you recognize the video that was depicted?
Yes, I do.
Does that appear to be consistent with your body-worn camera footage that you observed?
Yes, it is.
And does that appear to also be consistent with your recollection of the scene on Stony Brook Lane on February 23rd?
Correct.
I'd move Exhibit 2.
Any objection?
No objection.
Exhibit 2 will be received.
So, officer, I want to ask a few questions about that. When you arrived, which door to the residence did you enter through?
It would have been the side door off the driveway.
Okay. And was there a sort of a storm door that was a part of that door as well?
Yes, I believe so.
All right. After you observed the bucket, it appeared that you walked around the basement area of the residence. Is that right?
Yes, it did.
At that point, did you see any other parts of a human body?
No other parts of a human body, no.
Okay. Did you notice any areas of potential blood?
Yes.
And where was that?
Beyond the stack of mattresses, there appeared to be blood on the floor and then small chunks of human flesh.
Okay. In other areas of that basement, did you locate any obvious signs of blood?
There was a dried blood stain on the mattresses, and that was all that I remember seeing.
After you and Officer Plonky, was that the officer who is also depicted in that video?
Yes, it is.
Did other officers arrive on scene?
Yes.
And what did you and the other officers do at that point?
Sergeant Brester was next to arrive on scene. I kind of informed him of what we had up to this point and then what we needed to do next. We had two other officers responding. Once we got all the officers there that we needed, we conducted a protective sweep of the residence just to make sure there was no other people that we needed to know about, just to make sure that there was no other potential threats.
And you're the first officer to testify, so I'll ask you this because we've heard this term. What is a protective sweep?
It's not a search or anything like that. It's just conducting a sweep of the house just to make sure there's no other people hiding or no other threats.
So essentially a search for people?
Yeah.
Okay. Other than the towel that you lifted off the bucket, was any object moved or rummaged through by officers?
Not the initial responding officers, no.
Okay. And then at some point, do detectives and other personnel arrive on scene?
Yes.
I guess, what do you do after the protective sweep then?
We maintain the scene. Officer Linsmeyer and Officer O'Donnell transported Stephen and Tara to the police department along with their 16-year-old daughter, Ava. Sergeant Brester, Officer Plonky, and I remained on scene just to secure the scene and then wait for additional resources to respond, such as detectives.
What efforts did you undertake as part of your maintaining the scene that you referenced?
Just making sure that no one got in or out of that residence. Started a crime scene log just to keep track of who was coming and going as far as officers go. And then we ended up putting up crime scene tape around the house as well.
The crime scene log, is that something that you maintained?
Yeah, until I was relieved by day shift.
And I guess that just tracks who enters and leaves the residence?
Correct.
And there was, I think you mentioned crime scene tape that was affixed as well around the house?
Yes.
Thank you, officer. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Officer Wanish, good morning.
Morning.
You were working for the Green Bay Police Department on February 23rd of 2022, correct?
Yes, I was.
And you were on uniform patrol in a fully marked squad, correct?
Yes.
And you were dispatched over to 829 Stony Brook Lane, correct?
Correct.
That area is kind of by Fireman's Park where all the kids go sledding, correct?
Yes.
It's behind it?
It would be to the east of it.
Okay. Who dispatched you over to this location?
It was a dispatch call, and we were the only available units in the city, so Officer Plank and I responded.
Okay. And were you told that there was a suspicious situation over there?
I believe that's how the call was coded.
And the complainant was the male that you heard on there, correct?
Yes.
Did you later find him to be Stephen Hendricks?
Correct.
Who was the first person you talked to when you got to the Stony Brook Lane residence?
Female by the first name of Tara.
Was it Tara Pakinich?
Yes.
And that video, the officer that first entered was Officer Plonky, correct?
That is correct.
And then you followed behind?
Yes.
And the complainant said there was something in a bucket, but he couldn't tell what it was. Is that correct?
That is what he told us.
And you talked to Tara Pakinich, and she said that she thought it was her son's head in a bucket down in the basement?
That's correct.
And then did you ask where the body was?
I don't recall asking that specific question.
But after you did a search, you didn't find a body, did you?
I did not.
Okay. In the basement, you didn't find any people down there, correct?
Correct.
The only people that were at the house was Tara Pakinich, Stephen Hendricks, and Tara's daughter, Ava Wheelock. Is that right?
That's correct.
And this house, is it essentially have like a basement, floor level, and then an upstairs loft?
Yes, that's accurate.
There's like kind of like 3 floors, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you arrived, you knocked on the door, that side door that we saw, correct?
Yes.
It's right off the driveway, correct?
Yes.
And this was at nighttime, correct?
Yes, it was.
About 3:25 a.m.?
Correct.
And the people that you had contact with, Tara and Stephen, were they in shock?
Yeah, they both seemed to be in a state of shock.
Had they been sleeping prior to your arrival?
They were both awake and in the kitchen when we made contact.
But before you got there, was it your understanding that they went to bed and then something happened where they woke up and then they called the police?
Yes.
Okay. And did both Mr. Hendricks and Ms. Pakinich attempt to describe to you what they found or what they saw?
Yes.
Did they indicate that Shad Thyrion would come to the residence on Stony Brook for a few days and then would leave and come back and do laundry and things of that sort?
Yeah, they said that it was not his primary residence.
You're the first one that went down in the basement?
Correct.
And you had a flashlight with you?
Yes, I did.
It's kind of a high-powered flashlight so you can see, right?
Yes.
You went down to take a closer look at the contents of the bucket?
Correct.
And when you got to the bottom of the stairs, was there a laundry room area?
Yes, as you go down the stairs, the laundry room was directly to the left.
And then there was an open room as well?
Yes.
Was the open room to the right?
Yes, it was.
And was that used for storage?
It appeared to be. And then there was a stack of mattresses in the middle of the room as well.
And at some point then you saw the bucket, correct?
Yes.
And was there anything over the bucket?
There was a striped towel.
And was it over the top of it?
Yeah, it was completely covering the inside of the bucket.
Was it your discretion or duty to move the towel?
Yes, I had to verify what we had.
Okay. Now, did you have gloves on at all?
Yes, I did.
What kind of gloves?
Just regular patrol gloves.
Okay. When did you put those gloves on, do you know?
Typically, I put them on as soon as I get out of my car to go to any call.
But for this particular night, did you have them on?
Yes, I did.
When did you put them on?
Typically, I put them on right after I get out of my car, so I believe I would have put them on at that point.
Right after you got out of the squad car?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have them on when you went in that side door?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you keep them on during the entire time that you were in the Stony Brook Lane house?
Yes.
You removed the towel?
I did remove the towel from the bucket.
And then at some point, did you ask Officer Plonky to come and take a look as well?
Yes, I did.
At any point in time after you were done looking, did you put the towel back?
Once it was removed from the bucket, it was not placed back on the bucket.
Was it just allowed to lay on the floor, or what? Tell me what you know about that.
I believe it was just moved to the side and it was put on the floor next to the bucket.
do you know if anybody in the house, Mr. Hendricks or Ms. Pakinich, had touched what was in the bucket or moved it in any way?
I believe they both looked at it based on what they were saying to us, as far as Stephen couldn't tell what it was and Tara was positive it was her son's head.
You asked for additional units, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you asked for a supervisor?
Yes.
Did they come right away?
Yes.
On the video, we see that you pulled out your service revolver, correct?
That's correct.
Were you doing a protective sweep to make sure nobody was in the residence in the basement?
Yes.
Did you go through the entire house to see if there was anybody else in there?
Eventually, once we had more officers on scene, we cleared the rest of the house.
Okay. Did you see Taylor Schabusiness in the house when you were there?
She was not present when I was there.
And when you were looking around in the basement, it's true that you did not observe a body or any other body parts belonging to the severed head, correct?
That is correct.
Tara's daughter was in a bedroom on the ground level, correct?
Yeah, main floor.
And she was sleeping?
Correct.
Did she get up at some point then?
Yes, during our protective sweep, she was woken up.
Okay. And then did you transport Mr. Hendricks, Ms. Pakinich, and Ms. Wheelock to the police department, or did someone else do that?
Officer Linsmar and Officer O'Donnell completed that.
Okay. Did you maintain a crime scene log?
I started the crime scene log until I was relieved.
Okay. And who were you relieved by?
Officer Zawicki.
And then did you secure the crime scene?
Yes, we remained on scene to secure it.
Was that with Officer Plonky?
Yes.
And when you secure the crime scene, how do you do that?
We eventually put up the crime scene tape, but in the meantime, we just maintained the residence as the primary point of entry.
Now, on that video, when you're walking up the driveway, whose vehicles are in that driveway? Do you know?
I don't recall exactly who's the registered owner of those vehicles.
Do you know if the vehicles belong to Ms. Pakinich, Mr. Hendricks?
I don't know for certain, but it's possible.
Okay. Did you confirm if any vehicle belonging to Taylor Schabusiness was in that driveway on that particular date when you were there?
I personally did not.
Okay. And was Sergeant Brester on the scene as well?
Yes.
What was his role?
When I requested a supervisor, he was the supervisor that responded.
Okay. And did he come into the residence?
Yes, he did.
Did he go down in the basement to verify anything?
I believe he did, because he assisted with the protective sweep.
Okay. When you were there, did anything happen that would have caused the crime scene to be disturbed in any way?
No.
And did Mr. Hendricks indicate to you that he wasn't able to see what was in the bucket?
Yeah, he did mention something about difficulty with his vision.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Any redirect? No, you're. Okay, thank you. You can step down. State's next witness.
State calls Officer Ethan Plonky.
Want to come right up here, officer, and then before you have a seat, if you can turn and face her and raise your right hand, she'll place you under oath.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God? Please have a seat and state your name for the record.
My name is Ethan Plonky. I work with the Green Bay Police Department.
Okay, and then, sir, if you can just make sure you stay close to the microphone so we can hear you. You're pretty close right now, so you're probably good. With that, I will. The witness is yours, Mr. Saunders.
How are you employed with the Green Bay Police Department?
I am a patrol officer.
And how long have you been employed as a patrol officer?
Just over 3 years.
Is that the entirety of your law enforcement experience?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to ask you, officer, then about February 23rd of 2022. Do you recall if you were on duty for your department on that day?
I was.
And do you recall being dispatched to a residence on Stony Brook Lane
I
that
do.
day? And do you recall approximately what time you were dispatched?
I don't recall the exact time.
Was it like in the morning, the night, in the middle of the day?
Yes, early morning.
Okay. And why were you dispatched to that residence?
For a report of a female who had supposedly observed her son's severed head in a bucket in the basement.
And when you got to that residence, what did you do?
I made contact with the two individuals inside the residence. They were, I believe, a Stephen Hendricks and a Tara Pakinich. And then myself and Officer Wanish were the first to arrive on scene and make contact with them.
And then what did you do after you met with Tara and Steve?
I asked them what had occurred, to which Tara began to tell me her side of the story. While she was telling me her story, Officer Wanish had gone to the basement to look into this bucket that she had found. And that's when he told me that he did find a severed head in the bucket.
Did you then go down to the basement as well?
I did.
And what did you observe when you got to the basement?
I observed a black 5-gallon bucket to the right of the stairs as I go down. There was a beach towel over that now had been moved away, and in that bottom of that bucket was a severed head. And that's how I located.
What did you do at that point?
I then looked around the basement. Myself and Officer Wanish decided that we were going to have to clear the residence for any other threats that were going to be in the house.
And I guess was anyone else in the house other than the people you talked about earlier?
A teenage daughter, I believe, of the complainant was sleeping upstairs in her bedroom.
And I guess upstairs, what part of the house was that?
Either the first or the second floor. I believe it was the first floor, though.
And did other officers then arrive on scene?
Yes.
And what did you do at that point?
I stayed with the complainants, Tara and Stephen, while the other additional officers cleared the residence.
And by, I guess, what do you mean by cleared, just in everyday jargon?
Oh, sorry. So they would make sure the residents didn't have any other threats, like anybody else that was not supposed to be in the residence were not there. And I just stayed with Tara and Stephen to make sure that they were safe while this residence was being checked.
Were they, by they I mean Tara and Steve, were they transported away from the house?
Yes, by additional officers that had arrived on scene.
What did you do at that point?
While after they were transported?
Yes.
I just stood by on scene with Officer Wanish and Sergeant Brester until detectives and more officers could arrive to relieve us.
And did you assist Officer Wanish with crime scene tape around the area?
Yes, at the front of the residence before we had left.
And I guess generally were you sort of monitoring if people were coming and going in the house?
Yes, made sure nobody else had entered the crime scene.
The people who had entered the house, were they all members or affiliates of law enforcement?
Yes.
Thank you, Officer. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination, Mr. Fraley.
Thank you. Officer Plonky, a couple questions for you. So on Wednesday, February 23rd of 2022, you were working in full uniform patrol, correct?
Correct.
Was this zone 4E2?
That was my call sign.
Okay. Were you dispatched over to 829 Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay?
Correct.
And you received some information over dispatch, right?
Yes.
This residence, was it near like the Fireman's Park area?
Yes.
What report did you receive?
That a it was the boyfriend, Stephen, who called, but his girlfriend had woken him up, stating that she had gone into the basement and found her son's severed head in a bucket.
So you went over there to that residence, correct?
Correct.
By yourself in a fully marked squad?
I went over there in my own squad, but Officer Wanish came at the same time as I did.
Okay. And so then you parked on the street,
Yes.
and the two of you officers walked up,
Yes.
and it was dark outside. There was snow on the ground, correct?
Correct.
And who made contact with the residents first?
I believe I interacted with them first.
Okay. You're the one that knocked on the door, correct?
Correct.
And then the door opened and you kind of went inside a bit?
Yep.
Did you see some vehicles in the driveway?
I can't recall vehicles.
You don't recall if any vehicles were in the driveway when you walked up?
I don't recall. There might have been.
Okay. Do you know if the vehicles belonged to Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks?
If there were vehicles in there, I didn't run the license plates and didn't ask about who they belonged to.
Okay. And when you got to the door, you had some discussions with Ms. Pakinich and Mr. Hendricks, correct?
Correct.
And then what did you do? Did you go inside?
Correct. I was inside talking to them.
Okay. And then did Officer Wanish follow behind you?
Yes.
So were you on the first floor in the kitchen area where there was a table?
That's where I spoke to Stephen and Tara.
Okay. Try to find out what was going on, correct?
Correct.
And then was there a decision made between the two of you for one to go down and check what was going on in the basement?
Correct. Officer Wanish decided to go down and confirm what they were telling us.
Okay. As far as seniority, who had more seniority, Officer Wanish or yourself?
Officer Wanish has more seniority than I do.
Okay. So he took the bull by the horns and went down in the basement to check it out?
Correct.
And you maintained things upstairs?
Correct.
And then did you stand at the top of the stairs looking down to kind of keep in contact with Officer Wanish?
Correct.
And at some point then, were you asked to come down to verify as well what was in the bucket?
Yes.
And you did that?
I did.
Did you talk to Stephen Hendricks?
I made some conversation with him. I mainly talked to Tara.
Okay. But did Mr. Hendricks tell you that he went down to look at the bucket and you couldn't tell what it was?
Yes, I believe that was partially because he had just woken up and was almost in a state of shock.
Tara Pakinich was in a state of shock too? Is that fair?
Seemed to be that way.
And was it your understanding that Tara woke up for some reason, correct?
She heard the door close, I believe, to the residence.
The side door that you would come into?
Correct.
Okay. And then did she, what made her go downstairs? Do you know?
She was woken by the door, and I believe she wanted to check if there was anybody still inside of the house or if they had entered or left.
Did she find anybody inside the house?
She did not locate anybody that was alive in the house.
And did she tell you that she went downstairs to verify the basement situation?
Correct.
And then that caused her to have the police called?
Correct.
But before the police were called, was it such that Ms. Pakinich went up to tell her significant other, Stephen Hendricks, what she saw?
Since he called for police, I believe that's what happened.
Okay. When you were talking to Tara Pakinich, did she indicate that her son would sometimes come over for meals and do laundry and things like that?
Correct.
When you were in the residence, when you came in the residence, did you have any kind of patrol gloves on at all?
I don't recall.
Okay. When you went down in the basement, did you have gloves on?
I don't recall.
Okay. After, I'll strike that. Is it fair to say when you went down the stairs into the basement, you looked inside the bucket several times?
Yes.
Did you have a flashlight as well?
I always had my flashlight on duty.
Did you use the flashlight?
I most likely did, yeah.
Okay. And then you looked around in the basement, correct?
I glanced around the basement, yes.
You didn't see anybody down there, correct?
Nobody else down there, no.
Then at some point you went back up the stairs, is that fair?
Correct.
The bucket that you saw, what color was it?
Black, I believe.
And where was it located?
Just to the right of the stairs if you were to walk down.
Like if you walk down the stairs, would it be like around the corner?
To the right, you would be able to see it as soon as you got down at the bottom of the stairs.
Okay. So as you get off the last step, then you would see the bucket on the right?
Correct.
Did you move the contents of the bucket at all?
No, I did not touch any of the contents.
There was a towel on the bucket, and it was removed by Officer Wanish, correct?
Yes.
Did you look at the towel?
I believe I would also have seen the towel, yes.
Where was that sitting? Was it right on the floor next to the bucket, or?
It might have been. I cannot recall exactly where the towel was at that point.
Backup officers arrived, correct?
Correct.
And then who transported Tara Pakinich, Stephen Hendricks, and Abel Wheelock to the police department?
Additional officers, it was not me, and I don't know which officers exactly took that responsibility.
Was the daughter woken up right away after you got there?
During the protective sweep, officers had awoken her as they were going through the bedrooms.
Where did these people sit or stand when you were there? Tara Pakinich, Steve Hendricks, and Abel Wheelock. Were they sitting at that kitchen table on chairs? Were they standing in the kitchen?
There was points where Tara and Stephen might have been standing, but they were in the kitchen when I was with them.
Okay. When you were there, did Tara, Steve, or Ava go down in the basement?
No.
And was it your understanding that Stephen and Tara, they slept upstairs in the loft part?
Correct. That's what I believe it was laid out as.
And then was it your understanding that the ground level, it had like a kitchen and a bedroom, and that's where Ava slept?
Correct.
Then there was this finished basement, correct?
Correct.
In the basement, there was a laundry area, is that fair?
Correct.
Storage area?
Correct.
It was kind of messy down there, correct?
It was cluttered, as a lot of basements are.
Lots of stuff down there?
Correct.
And officers did a protective sweep of the house and found no other threats, correct?
Correct.
And then you waited on the scene and you started a crime scene log, correct?
Correct.
When you start a crime scene log, can you tell me what that involves?
So starting a crime scene log is you put the address, and then you start listing all the occupants who have entered and left the crime scene. So like my name would go on it, Sergeant Brester, Officer Wanish, and then we would mark like the reason for being there and then their time in and out.
Okay. And you did that?
I started it, yes.
Okay. Did you also assist Officer Wanish with putting up crime scene tape?
Correct.
Is that kind of like the yellow crime scene tape that we see on TV?
Correct.
Where did you put the crime scene tape?
I believe we just outlined the front yard of the residence, holding it around trees and making sure that everybody could see that they were not supposed to enter the property.
Did it cover the front door of Stony Brook?
It would have encompassed the front door.
And the side door of Stony Brook?
I can't recall exactly if we had brought crime scene tape up to the back point.
Okay, nothing further. Thank you.
Redirect. Thank you. You're excused.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our mid-morning break. It's about 5 after 10. We'll take about a 10-minute break and be back at 10:15. All rise for the jury. Council, anything to bring up before we take a recess, Mr. Saunders?
No.
Mr. Braley?
No.
Very good. So